Here we go. Welcome in. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. Thank you for tuning in. I am Collin. Big Ten Media Days has come and gone as we are now entering the fall camp stage of the football season as Iowa reports to camp this Wednesday, July 31st. So football season is here, everybody. Media Days is behind us. Camp is starting up. You got NFL training camp starting. You got NFL preseason games starting up here in the next week. Football season is back. I am recording this on Saturday, July 27th. I'll have this out a few days after this. So by the time you guys listen to this, we will be less than 5 weeks away from Iowa taking on Illinois State. Let's get back into what we are going to talk about today, and that is Big Ten Media Days, Iowa, and that's mainly what we're going to do. I'm not going to really get into other things or other teams in Big Ten Media Days. I am going to mainly focus on what I heard from Kirk, some of the players, kind of my takeaways. So let's begin first with the Iowa depth chart, the annual let's freak out, let's make assumptions, pre-camp depth chart. And I do think it is fun to have a couple takeaways, and that is what we're going to do. So let's first talk the offense. The first thing that caught my eye on Wednesday when I looked at this depth chart was that there's 3 listed wide receiver spots. First time ever. Typically, and I shouldn't say typically, no, in the past, we would have 2 wide receiver spots and then 2 tight end spots, which made sense because in the past, we ran a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of 22 personnel, and even sometimes 13 personnel. Now, I don't think that's going away necessarily. We're still going to use tight ends a lot. Why? Because you have Luke Lachey, one of the best tight ends in the country, who could be an early day 2 draft pick. You have Addison Ostrengo, who showed flashes last year to be the next really good tight end to come out of tight end U. And then Tim Lester's opening presser back in February, he stated how he is well aware this is tight end U, and that Iowa has really good tight ends and that he's going to make sure that they get the ball. So we're not going away from that. But what I do think, and when I saw this, my first takeaway was when I saw 3 listed wide receiver spots, is that Lester is going to utilize the wide receivers and is going to get the ball to as many wide receivers as possible because he knows, he is well aware that wide receivers are critical and crucial for any successful offense. And so that's what gets me fired up. Now, I could be dead wrong on that theory, but I just think when I saw that, I was like, man, we are going to utilize the wide receivers this year. I just seeing that right there. It's like, we are going to utilize the wide receivers. Tim Lester is going to figure out ways to get the wide receivers the ball. And so you start at the way top, you have Jarriett Bowie and Dane Howard. I'm sure that's kind of your ex wide receiver. Makes sense. I'm really excited for Jarriett Bowie, and we'll talk a little bit more about him towards more of the back end of this episode. And then you go in the middle and you see Seth Anderson and then Caden Weegan. Now, to me, I thought it was kind of surprising seeing Seth Anderson above Caden, because if you go back to spring, you had Seth Anderson practically out the entire spring. And then Caden Weegan was getting raved by every coach. Like Lester was just raving him up. You had some other players just talking about, how Caden had a really good spring. And so to see Seth Anderson, even though, like I said, he didn't play at pretty much at all during the spring, seeing him above Caden tells me and shows me that they know what they have in Seth. And I'm really excited for Seth Anderson because I don't think we utilized him well enough last year. You saw the first couple games. He had that touchdown at the beginning of the Utah State game, kind of made that double move. And I get the corner kind of tripped, but that was a good move, wide open touchdown. Week 2 against Iowa State, did another double move, was wide open. If Cade just connected to him, that would have been a 70, 80-yard touchdown. And so you have someone that is talented enough to be able to do those type of things. We got to get that guy the ball. And I know he played FCS, but he was freshman offensive player of the year, FCS level, Charleston Southern. That tells you something. The kid's talented. Other wide receiver spot listed on the way bottom. And so you had some people tweeting like, where's Kaleb Brown? Where's Kaleb Brown? It's like, oh no, he's on the way bottom. You have Kaleb Brown, which makes sense, by the way. He's going to be our number 1 wide receiver. And then TJ or Terrell Washington Jr. We talked a little bit about him during the spring, how he kind of transitioned from being a running back, because our running back room is just, there's a lot of guys. And I think what they see in Terrell Washington or TJ Washington is, this is a guy that I don't think he can just stay on the sidelines. Like, we have to make sure he's out there ever so often. We got to get him the ball because he's a playmaker. And so I'm actually really excited for him. I'm really pumped for him. You go back to his high school highlights down in Texas. He's a guy that caught the ball a lot. He was more of a receiving running backs. And so this makes sense. And I think seeing him on the depth chart, and like I said, because he was going to be buried, if he stayed at the running back position, he was going to be buried, 4 or 5, probably 5th, right? LaShawn Williams, Caleb Johnson, Moulton, and then Jazz, and then, Terrell Washington. And they, like I said, I think they see something in Terrell. They see something that, like, man, we have to make sure he's in there ever so often. And how do we do that? Let's move him wide receiver. Number one, we need more wide receiver help. But number two, this guy's a playmaker, and we got to get him out there ever so often. Let's move in at wide receiver. Let's move him to the slot. He can back up Caleb. And I think it's really good to see him out there. Now, some people were commenting, where's Jacob Gill? Where's Jacob Gill? Well, guys, let's remember, he just came to campus 6 weeks ago, right? He didn't go through spring. So he's still learning the offense. Trust me when I say this. Jacob Gill is going to play this year. He's going to be out there. So whenever you see that, like going back to when I said everybody freak out, everybody make assumptions from the pre-camp depth chart, this is exactly what I mean by that. Because I saw so many people being like, oh, why is Jacob Gill not listed? Relax. And another one was Brendan Sullivan behind Linez. Once again, relax. Yes, he's a third-string quarterback as of right now. It's because he just came on campus 6 weeks ago. He's still learning the offense, right? Linez had an entire spring in this new offense, so he's going to be slightly ahead of him. But I guarantee you, come game week, Sullivan will be QB2. And that's nothing against Linez, because I think Linez is a decent quarterback. He's still learning, right? He's still young. But Sullivan has Big Ten experience. He's played in Big Ten games. Like, he's going to be QB2 when it's all said and done. Trust me on that. Like, that's not going to be a thing, but it makes sense why he is number 3 right now. Also, I want to point out Kamari Moulton taking over that third string running back spot ahead of Jazwan Patterson. Honestly, this makes sense because you go through of all spring and all we heard was how good Kamari Moulton is. And then we hear that he added 15 to 18 pounds to his frame. It just makes sense. And nothing against Jazwan. Like, I like Patterson. I think he's a pretty good football player. I was honestly shocked that he didn't transfer. I'm glad he didn't. I don't want any transfers. But if I had a bet, like let's say back in the spring, if you told me, hey, bet one player to leave, I would have said Patterson, because the running back room is just filled with so many good players. You got 2 guys ahead of you, but then you also got guys behind you that might take over your spot. So I just thought Patterson from Florida, maybe he goes back towards or closer to Florida. I just thought that had been an easy bet, but he stayed. And I'm glad he stayed because I think Patterson's a decent football player. But Kamari Moulton, I mean, he showed flashes last year and adds to his frame now. If he can maintain that speed with that added weight, watch out. Look at the offensive line. I thought Bo Stevens starting at left guard was maybe a little bit surprising, but I think everything that I'm hearing about him, and, he is the biggest lineman on our team. I think he's listed at, I don't have the depth chart pulled up on me. I know on YouTube, you guys are probably watching it. I think he's like he's anywhere from between 320 and 325 pounds. And, I'm expecting good things out of him. I think he's kind of a critical piece for us because you look at the offensive line and you have, like, obviously Logan Jones at center. You have Connor Colby at the other guard position, Mason Richmond, James Dunker at tackle. Really the biggest question mark, and not really even a question mark, but it's like, okay, can that other guard play? Can we be good at that guard play? Last year, Rusty Feth came in 1 year, and I think he played really well. And so can Bo Stevens be that guy? I thought maybe Tyler Ellsbury would be the starter as of right now, because I think Ellsbury had a really good back end of the season last year. Now, he was playing center when Logan Jones was hurt. But right now he is backup center for Logan Jones as of right now on the depth chart. I think this is a good problem to have, though, because you have some guys that are capable of playing that guard position. You have obviously Bo Stevens, who's starting. You have Nick DeJong. You have Tyler Ellsbury. And so you have these guys that all could play that position. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the fall camp kind of unfolds and kind of seeing who is going to solidify themselves at that guard position. Because like I said, I think the other 4 positions are all solidified. Logan Jones, James Dunker, Mason Richmond, Connor Colby. Those guys are going to start. It's really that other guard position. Who is going to make the name out of themselves and who is going to be the solidified starter? So that's going to be very interesting to see. And then defensively, John Nestor, starting corner for Iowa. I guess it makes sense because you go through all of spring And Phil Parker typically doesn't hype up or talk up his players. And there was a few times where he mentioned John Nestor. So Phil Parker loves this kid and he sees something in this kid. So it honestly doesn't surprise me that he's starting over Deshaun Lee. But in a way, it kind of does, just because Deshaun Lee, I thought last year played really good for his first year starting at Iowa. He had to play the first 2 games because Jamari Harris was out due to the gambling situation. And I thought he played just fine. And then he played more towards the back end of the season when Cooper Jean got hurt. So he has a lot of starting experience. So you would just assume that he would be starting. And so to see John Nestor ahead of him, I think, once again, going back to like seeing Seth Anderson ahead of Caden, I think that's a good sign. And that's a good problem to have, because if John Nestor starts, you have a capable backup in Deshaun Lee, a guy that started 6 games last year, 7 or 8 games. I don't really remember, but it was at least probably 6 games. So that's a really good problem to have. He's also the backup cash, John Nestor is. And then the defensive line. This is probably the biggest question mark, obviously, entering fall camp, is the defensive line depth. Right now, each position has 2 backups listed per position. And so I don't think that really means anything. I just think that shows you that there's going to be a lot of competition. There's going to be a lot of, okay, who's going to step up here? Who is going to be the true backup to the starter? Because right now, there is 6 guys that I think are capable, that are true, like, I feel comfortable with them being out there. And that's obviously the starting 4 with Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Yahweh Black, and Ethan Hurkett. And then I think you have Brian Allen and Max Llewellyn as the 2 comfortable backups. And then you could maybe make the case Jeremiah Pittman, defense tackle. Outside of those guys, who is going to step up? And so I do like how they listed a lot of backups, because I think it's showing you that there is going to be a true competition. That is something to keep an eye on. We're going to try to figure out, okay, who is going to be the next couple guys, because I just listed 6 or 7 that I feel comfortable with. For Iowa, I think and the reason why our defensive line has been so successful in the last couple of years is because we've been playing 8 guys or even 9 guys. And so who's going to be that 7th or 8th guy that is going to step up and we feel comfortable can go out there and, play a couple series here or there and things like that. All right, next up on the agenda is Cade McNamara, as Kirk was asked about him on Wednesday, and Kirk pretty much alluded that Cade is QB1. He pointed out that back in 2021, in that same stadium, in Lucas Oil Stadium, Cade led Michigan against Iowa to a Big Ten championship, led them to the playoffs. And he just said that he is confident that if Cade can stay healthy, he can get back to that level like he was playing in 2021. He also mentioned that we as Iowa fans have yet to see his true potential in an Iowa uniform, which I 100% agree with that, because you go back to last year, that quad injury, not only did that affect his game in those 4 1/4 games that he played, but you think about all the missed practices during camp that he didn't participate in. The practices to build that chemistry, build that timing with your wide receivers, all that was lost. And so then you go into the game, or go into the season, I should say, and he looks rusty as hell. So now, if he can stay healthy, and that is the hope, and he participates in all of fall camp, that he can hopefully get back to that level of 2021. And he looks a little bit more crisp this year than he did last year, especially in those first couple games. Now, the biggest question is, he didn't play much in 2022. He didn't play much in 2023. So he hasn't played much football since 2021. That is the biggest question mark. And that is something that, we will all monitor and watch for, and just see how close, or if he can get to that level, or how close can he get to that level. And, at the end of the day, I like Brendan Sullivan. I was so pumped that we got him. I think he's a great backup, and I think he's a competent starter if he has to be. But I just think this year is Cade's year. You got to roll with him if he's healthy. And you know what? He's done after this year. Brendan still has 1 more year. That can be Brendan's year next year. He can take over the reins next year. But for right now, I'm all in on Cade. I hope he has a great year. I hope he can stay healthy. Next up, and Kirk confirmed this, and this doesn't come as a surprise at all, but Caleb Brown suspended week 1 against Illinois State for his OWI, which you go back to previous cases and previous times this has happened, and they all got 1 game suspension. So we kind of figured that was going to be the case with Caleb. The bad news is that you don't develop that chemistry week one against an inferior opponent. Hopefully, we don't need Caleb Brown to beat Illinois State. The good news, though, however, that, you get other players like Jerry Bowie's, Dane Howard's, Seth Anderson's, TJ Washington. You get them now the opportunity to shine that game. And hypothetically, I'm not saying this is going to happen. This is wishful thinking. But if the receivers actually look decent week one, like if we make a point to get them the ball and we feel somewhat good about the wide receivers after that game, that's going to be a hell of a feeling because we'll know, like, wow, we did all that without our best wide receiver, and now we're getting our best wide receiver back. So there's good news and bad news to this all. Obviously, wish it just never happened. Unfortunately, it did. But like Kirk said, got to move on. Caleb will learn from this, and we'll move on from this. And let's stay with the wide receivers a little bit because Kirk was asked about them a decent amount on Wednesday. And to me, I felt like Kirk was pretty optimistic about the group. Like he was saying, they're young, there's still, work to be done. But for the most part, he feels somewhat confident with this group. And he had an interesting quote that I'm going to share. He said, I actually have a good feeling about the room right now. It's got to show on the field. I think Jerry Bowie is going to be a really good player for us. We don't have a lot of production in that room right now, which is obvious, but the opportunity is there for them. I think we have 6, 7, or 8 guys I'm interested to see how they do and how they emerge. I throw Dane Howard in there. At our last practice, he made a catch over on the sideline and made a couple plays that really caught my eye. Watching him over the summer, it looks like he's growing and maturing and gaining some confidence in himself. So a few things with that quote that he said. Number one, he brings up Jerry Bowie and Dane Howard. And I think these two guys are the biggest X factors for us. We know what we have in Caleb Brown for the most part. We somewhat know what we have in Seth Anderson because we kind of saw that at the beginning of last year. Unfortunately, we just decided let's just not throw him the ball the rest of the way. Jerry Bowie, Dane Howard, 2-year guys in now, right? They were freshmen last year. They've gotten bigger. I think Jerry Bowie has added at least 10 pounds. He's over 200 pounds. He's 6'1", so he's a lengthy guy. He's athletic. He comes from the state of Florida where there's just a lot of talent, and so you almost get kind of lost in the mix. I think he was under-recruited. Dane Howard coming from Kansas City, really, really lengthy frame, 6'4". He's that perfect X position player. He just has to add a little weight to himself, which he did over the summer. I go back a couple of days ago, I listened to a podcast that John Budmeyer was on, and he just stated that both of those guys really took that next step in spring ball. Now it's all about being consistent. So you've taken that growth a little bit and, you're still growing, but now it's about being consistent. And John Budmeyer really talked about those two guys and almost seemed really excited about what those two guys can do. And so for me, like I said, those guys are my X factor. I think Kirk just bringing up those guys randomly in a quote, especially Jerry Bowie, saying, I think Jerry Bowie is going to be a really good player for us. That tells you something because more times than not, Kirk just doesn't call out individual players and praise them like that. And so I think that's a really good sign as of right now. Going back more about the wide receivers, Luke Lachey added that he feels Iowa's wide receivers have been a more optimistic group with Tim Lester's offense. And then Bowie, in an article that I was reading last week, stated, I love playing this offense right now. It's brought my confidence up. I'm more excited than I was last year. So just going back to when we were talking about the depth chart, and I was talking about how there's 3 wide receiver spots now, first time ever. And I really feel like that is a sign that we are going to start getting the wide receivers the ball more. And then you read like a sentence like that where you see excitement from a wide receiver. Like, I'm excited for this year. I'm more excited this year than I was last year. And I get it. It's what's he supposed to say? Is he supposed to say the opposite? I understand that. But you can see that excitement from these players. It's not just Jerry Bowie talking. Like, a lot of these guys have said that. I mean, Caleb Brown has said it. I think there is genuine excitement for what Tim Lester is trying to do, trying to get the playmakers the ball, trying to get the wide receivers the ball. Because once again, Tim Lester knows that the wide receivers are a huge priority and they need the wide receivers to step up to have a successful offense. I do want to switch to the defense and talk a little bit more about the defensive line because I do think out of any position group, even more so than the wide receivers, that defensive line depth is probably the biggest concern. And I wouldn't really say it's a huge concern, but it's something to monitor and keep a close eye on as we go through fall camp. Kirk Ferentz had a quote that said, on Wednesday. We might have 7 guys who can start, but after that, I'm not sure who is who and what is what. So we have to find that out. We have to bridge that gap fast. The potential is there at all 4 spots, but we haven't seen enough to say, okay, this guy's going to get 20 snaps this game. So to me, I love the starters. I love some of the key backups. And apparently so does Phil Steele, because he has Iowa in the top 15 defensive lines in the country, which is really good. And it seems like every year, especially on defense, that there's always a guy that we least expect. And then we go through the year and we're like, oh my gosh, this guy's actually pretty damn good. And then the next thing we know, the next year, he's a starter. I mean, look at like last year, Ethan Hurkett. We didn't probably think much of him going through, fall camp and into the season. And you start watching him play and you're like, okay, I think we have something in this guy. And now he's a starter. So it seems like it's clockwork that we always find those random guys that we least expect, and they end up being solid football players for us. And that is the hope in this circumstance. But it's like I said, it's just something that we will have to monitor, keep a close eye on during fall camp, see who can emerge and be the 7th, 8th, 9th guy. Because if we have a solid 8 guys that we feel 100% confident in, and I think we are 100% confident in 7 of them, if we can find 1 or 2 more, I think that is huge for Iowa. And to wrap everything up, to kind of summarize everything that we just talked about, reading between the lines and just watching and listening to Kirk on Wednesday, I feel like Kirk knows what he has with this team. And I think there's a sense of confidence that this team can be something special. And I keep saying this, that I really, truly believe that this Iowa team this year can make the college football playoffs. If there's a year to do it, it's this year. And I don't just say that lightly. I'm not some Homer fan where I just think that every single year. Trust me, I do not. But this year, I 100% believe that this team can make it to the college football playoffs. We have the team, we have the defense, we have the schedule. And if the offense can just be average and competent with the new offensive coordinator, Kirk Ferentz talked about how he thinks the offense can be better if the quarterback play is better and the offensive line is better. Well, you look at the offensive line and all the career starts that they have, they should be better. They're all very, very old. A lot of experience. You have Cade McNamara, who, if he stays healthy, is a damn good quarterback. We've seen that in the past, or at least a pretty good quarterback. And you have a competent backup just in case Cade goes down. We have the running backs. Obviously, wide receiver, still a question mark, but there's a lot of potential there. You have one of the best tight ends in the country. This team, I'm telling you right now, can make it all the way. There's a sense of confidence within this program. Jay Higgins talking about it. He mentioned the goal is to make the playoffs. The leadership on this team with Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, Sebastian Castro, to the offensive side of the ball with Cade McNamara, some of the offensive line. Like I said, it's a very veteran group. I think this is a year, man. I really do. I think this year is a year that if there's any year we make the college football playoffs, it's this year. And I really hope it happens. Not saying it's going to happen, but I hope it does happen. A few other notes before we end this podcast. Kirk Ferentz was asked about Brian. I thought he had a great answer about how life moves on, and I think that is so true in this circumstance. You had both parties that, let's face it, we just had to move on. It wasn't working. The offense was bad. The nepotism was getting out of hand. The distractions was getting out of hand. The best thing that had to happen was both parties move on. And I'm sure for Kirk, when this all happened back in late October, he was probably pretty angry, pretty sad, pretty heartbroken, pretty pissed about what all happened and what all transpired. But looking back on it, it was a blessing in disguise. It had to happen. Now Brian's at Maryland. We got our offensive coordinator. As of right now, we don't know how it's going to be, but as of right now, we feel comfortable. We feel confident. And, like I said, Brian has a job now. So both parties are in a good direction. That's good. But let's just move on from it. So I just want to touch on that. Big Ten championship game is going to be played in Indianapolis till 2028. I absolutely love that because I love Indianapolis. I've been to all 3 games that Iowa's played in. Unfortunately, the outcomes haven't been great, but the weekend in itself has been great. I think Indy, you have all the bars close by, you have the stadium close by. The stadium is really nice. It's just a great host city. And for us Iowa fans, we're not too far away, right? If you don't want to fly, it's not that far of a drive. So I love that. I do think, though, after 2028, it's going to be a rotation between like Indy, Las Vegas, or LA, or maybe even both of those cities. And then if Chicago gets their new indoor stadium, which I don't know if that's even passed or not. I guess I know that they were talking about that, but if they did that, I'm sure they would be another city that if they did get a dome stadium that we would play probably the Big Ten championship game, which would actually be awesome for Iowa if we ever make it, because Chicago is a very, very short drive. And there's a lot of Iowa fans that live in Chicago. And then lastly, and I guess this one I probably should have said right away, but Iowa picked to finish 5th in the media poll. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with, we talked 2 episodes ago, the Big Ten preview. Phil Steele, a lot of media outlets have Iowa kind of finishing 5th. And so that kind of makes sense. We're just below, some of the big dogs like Penn State and Michigan and Oregon, Ohio State. So I respect that. So yeah, that will do it for this episode. I know I didn't touch on everything. I mean, let's face it, Big Ten Media Days, it's pretty much a full day of interviews and coach talking and the players talking that, it's kind of hard to hit on literally everything they talk about. I'm sure there's a few things that maybe you thought I was going to mention that I didn't. It is what it is. I wanted to keep this episode pretty short. So Tyler and I will be back later this week as fall camp starts up. So make sure you tune into that. Until then, guys, have a good rest of your week and go Hawks.